Not the letter they were expecting. A first-person story by Jordan Ellis. Monday, 7:46 a.m. The coffee in my cup has gone cold, even though I just poured it. The gray Denver morning light filters through the blinds. On the screen, the last thing I'm about to send from my corporate email. Subject, thank you and goodbye. No drama, no accusations, just facts. I'm not burned out. I'm just tired of cleaning up after decisions I didn't make. If you're wondering how things stayed together, check the folder titled Fixes and Futures in our shared Google Drive. I read the letter 3 times. It sounded exactly how I felt, calm, clear, without hysteria. This wasn't revenge, it was a boundary. And finally, it was set. I hit send. I sit still for a moment, then take off my badge and place it next to the old marble lion head paperweight, the only gift I ever got from management. Then I close my laptop. For good. 20 minutes later, my Slack blows up. My phone pings every minute. Jordan, wait, what? Are you okay? Is this a prank? And from Sam in Legal. Please clarify, was this resignation official? HR needs confirmation. I don't reply, because everything's already been said. No anger, no pleas, just, I'm done. At 11:36 a.m., an unknown number calls. I recognize the area code San Francisco. Only one person from the company calls from a non-work phone. I answer. Hello? Pause. Jordan, can we talk? It's Michael, our CEO. He's always had a pleasant voice. Smooth like a corporate values commercial. He continues. We saw your email. I think it caught us all off guard. I stay silent, not because I have nothing to say, but because he's clearly just starting to read. He inhales, like he's about to go into, we appreciate your contribution, but instead asks, was it something specific? And here I smile, not sadly, not even sarcastically, just, finally, everything's in place. I answer calmly, no, Mike, it wasn't something, it was everything, and that's why I didn't list names. You'll find yourself in there if you look close enough. Silence again. And in that silence, I hear the old system breaking down. No shouting, no fires, just quietly, a pillar being pulled out. He exhales. I think we should have a proper conversation. I nod, though he can't see it. Sure, just not as an employee. And in that moment, I realized I didn't leave in protest. I stepped into clarity. I didn't burn a bridge. I finished building it to a place they never intended to go. That same evening, one of my former colleagues messaged me. This wasn't a goodbye letter, it was a guide to recovery. I saved that message, just in case I ever forget again that silence isn't weakness. It wasn't the letter they were expecting, but it was the one they needed. At least once to hear the true version from someone who always just did the work. When I look back on my last 2 years at the company, corporate parties, team brainstorms, or phrases about our values don't come to mind. Number. What I remember are spreadsheets at 2 a.m., weekend calls, and a Google Doc titled Emergency Plan Again. I added the word again after 8 months. I remember sitting on the floor by the Christmas tree with my MacBook on my lap while my nephew asked why I wasn't playing Uno with him. I answered, I'm almost done. He nodded. Kids rarely argue with someone who is always almost done. But it wasn't about being tired. Fatigue was part of the uniform. It was an invisible dress code. Those who hold everything together just do it quietly. One of my favorite cases was a project with a medical AI startup client from Atlanta. The manager broke down by week 2 vacation. Then, emotional burnout. I picked up everything, rewrote the plan, led the meetings myself, managed a crisis when our API triggered 40% false alerts for prediabetes. Not only did we keep the contract, we expanded it. During the team call afterward, our product director said, amazing job, especially Chris, he held the front. Chris? He was at a conference in Miami and sent me a good luck lol sticker on Slack. I nodded, because that's how it's supposed to go. Every Friday we had performance circles. Oh, those circles. Everyone sits, holding a company logo mug, pretending to talk about growth. Once, during a review, Michael, our CEO, looked me in the eyes and said, "Jordan, you're consistent, rock solid. But you know someone like Chris. He's a leader. He brings energy. He makes noise." I smiled, so politely that I wanted to scream inside. I thought, maybe if I yelled more they'd find me charismatic, or if I made presentations with memes and called them strategic frameworks. But out loud I said, "Got it, I'll try to be louder." They didn't notice that behind the stability was a system I held together by threads because no one else bothered to connect the dots. When everything was falling apart, I wasn't called in, I was already there. Like a startup medic, no uniform, not on a Forbes cover, but with a first aid kit, duct tape, and a plan B. The strangest moment? When I got a bonus equivalent, a $50 Amazon gift card for closing a crisis that saved us $400,000 in annual revenue. Chris, at the same time, got a speaking slot at TechX Summit. His talk was called "Taking Ownership: How We Saved a Client by Acting Fast." I sat in the audience. He showed slides I put together. He told a joke I made up. And he finished with the line, "Sometimes leadership is just showing up." Right. Only I wasn't considered a leader because I didn't bare my teeth, because I didn't take over the room, because I always had enough space if someone else felt cramped. I remember once HR told me, "You're like the foundation. Everything rests on you. You're reliable." I smiled. Only later at home did I realize that foundations don't get flowers. They don't get invited on stage. They don't get promoted. They simply go unnoticed until they crack. I didn't leave because I couldn't handle it. I handled the work of 5 people. I left because I finally understood. If you're invisible all the time, you become convenient, not valuable. So, on Monday morning, I simply stopped being invisible. I wrote a letter. I told the truth. I sent them not noise, but clarity. And now let them make noise. I finally stepped out of the circle quietly, but loudly for myself. Have you ever felt like you're in a movie where nobody sees you? You're on camera, holding the mic, but the sound is off, and everyone's watching, not you, but those waving their hands nearby. That's how I felt the day the company announced the new head of our division. It should have been me. Not because I thought I was irreplaceable, but because I was ready. I was already doing that job. I was holding the department together when our former leader left for personal projects. I built processes from scratch, created a whole knowledge base in Notion so newcomers wouldn't get lost in their first 2 months. I wrote guides, facilitated meetings, joined strategy sessions, all without an official title. And then Thursday, team Zoom call. Everyone's cameras on, some with coffee, some with kids in the background. HR smiles at the slide on screen. New leadership announcement. We're so excited to welcome 2 amazing leaders into their new roles. Both have shown such energy, passion, and alignment with our founder's spirit. And then their names appear. Max and Ellie. Max, my former subordinate. Yes, the one I helped write the first QBR strategy last September. The one who missed deadlines 3 times and then explained it as emotional navigating the team through uncertainty. And Ellie, a lovely girl, good at social media, knows how to make presentations with emojis and sparkles, once ran a workshop that got canceled, but was praised for her initiative. They're both nice. But what happened wasn't nice. After the call, I stayed alone in the room. Stared at the black Zoom screen until a Slack notification popped up from a colleague. "Jordan, I thought you'd get it. This is weird." I poured water, took a sip, and didn't swallow. Something else stuck in my throat, a mix of betrayal and foolishness. Later, in the office kitchen, I overheard one HR whisper to another, "She's just not startup material. You know, not the vibe. Too serious." Something inside sank. Because I really thought being professional was the way. I thought you needed to know Excel, not TikTok. That it's important to talk business, not create vibes. That leadership means holding the team, not being the first to shout, "Let's go" at a meeting. I wasn't more energetic. I was steadier. I wasn't a fountain, I was a dam. On Friday, a product manager came up to me and said, I know you're not into titles, but if anything, this was unfair. I nodded. But inside, I already knew I didn't want to fight for a spot in someone else's show, where looking good mattered more than what you actually do. Later that evening, I opened LinkedIn and looked at my resume draft, not because I decided to quit, but because inside it was already decided. I just needed to make it official. I looked at my headline: Senior Project Strategist with 9 years in SaaS leadership. And I thought, maybe I should write, the person who thought for too long that results speak for themselves, but now speaks for herself. And you know what was the last straw? When Max came into my office the next day and said, I don't know why I'm lucky, but apparently people just trust me. I smiled. Luck isn't forever. Luck isn't a strategy. He didn't get it, and he wasn't supposed to. That's when I opened Google Docs. Started writing a letter. Not a complaint, not a confession. Just the truth. No noise, no caps lock, no despair. I'm not burned out. I'm just tired of fixing what others broke. If you want to know how things held together, look into my documents. I'm leaving calmly, because for the first time in a long time, I'm choosing myself. The next morning, I hit send. Walked outside, bought myself oat milk coffee and a chocolate croissant. At 11:42, the phone rang. The number was unknown. I answered, Jordan, can we talk? I smiled. Now yes, but on new terms. Wednesday evening. The world was quiet, as if waiting for something. And I was sitting barefoot in the kitchen, with a cooled-down tea and a laptop that knew too much about me, inside a blank Google Docs page, title, Thank you, and Goodbye. I wasn't going to write a complaint. I didn't want revenge. I didn't believe in drama as a method. But if I was leaving, it wouldn't be engulfed in emotions, but clarified. Not with anger, but with clarity. With the irony we deserved. With respect above all for myself. I started simply, Good morning, team. This letter is not a grievance, it's a closure. I remembered how I was asked to stay over New Year when everyone else left. How I coordinated a client migration at 3 a.m. because we had only one chance not to break everything. How I prepared investor presentations even though I wasn't on meetings with them. I describe this not as a list of achievements, but as context. I'm not asking for thanks. I'm just reminding you this wasn't a shadow doing it. It was me. Next, the facts. I opened Excel, the very one where for years I kept my modest records. Deadlines, projects, metrics. Average retention growth under my responsibility 18%. Number of internal guides written by me 42. Number of new positions opened on my initiative 6. I knew. No one argues with numbers. But I also added what can't be measured by numbers. I was the one who knew who had a baby born and who needed silence in meetings. The one who said, let me close this task, you're already at your limit. The one who perhaps believed too long that just being a support is a growth strategy. Then I wrote the main thing. The phrase that had been running through my head since the day I was passed over for promotion. I helped this system grow, but now it's grown in a direction where I'm no longer interested. No resentment, no accusations. Simply, I no longer feel part of the direction. I added, I still believe in the people here, just no longer in where we're going. At the end, a touch of irony. If anyone's curious how things have held together for the past 2 years, look in my Google Docs. It's all there, even instructions on how to brew tea in the office kitchen. And finally, I'm leaving quietly. No farewell cakes, no mass emails. Just turning off Slack and walking outside. Thank you for everything, especially for what you taught me. Sometimes silence is the highest form of leadership. When the letter was ready, I read it aloud. Not a single angry word. No attacks. Only facts. Only subtle mockery if you know where to look. I sent it at 7:04 a.m. Put the subject line, Thank you, and goodbye. Turned off Slack. Opened my calendar, deleted all meetings. Closed the laptop. It was cool outside, but bright. I walked toward McCarran Park. People were already running, drinking coffee. Someone was walking a pug in a sweater. I sat on a bench. Took a breath. and felt a strange lightness. Not because I left gracefully, but because I left completely, without leftovers, without grudges, without the desire to return and prove anything. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Slack pinged. I didn't open it. I sat on the bench, watched the light fall on the grass, and thought, I didn't leave because I couldn't handle it. I left because I outgrew what was there. And that, strangely enough, was the first time in a long while that I felt not like a worker, not like a fixer, not like the reliable one, but just myself. I had just returned home after a walk in McCarran Park. I bought myself a coffee with oat milk and, unusually for a Monday morning, felt not anxiety, but pure washed-out calm. Slack remained turned off. Email too. I turned on Spotify, put on the playlist Lo-Fi Goodbye, and sat down on the couch, just breathing. 3 hours after sending the letter, the phone rang. The number was unknown, just no caller ID. I wasn't going to answer, but my finger moved on its own. Hello? Jordan? It's Kevin. The voice was familiar down to the last intonation. Kevin Riley, co-founder, CEO. The same one who once called me the company's invisible cooling system during a meeting, clearly not fully realizing he had compared me to a machine. That was unexpected, he said right away. People are shocked. We didn't know how hard it was for you. I was silent for a second, then calmly said, You knew. You just didn't look. There was silence on the other end. Long enough to make it clear he hadn't expected this level of frankness. But I no longer had a reason to play the role of the friendly one from the background. You do understand, he began slowly, that startups are always like this. Hot, fast. You don't notice everything in time. I smiled not out loud, but to myself. I had heard that voice hundreds of times. He knows how to speak softly, knows how to forgive when he wants you to feel guilty for your own exhaustion. I'm not blaming you, Kevin. I just made a decision. He sighed. Maybe. Maybe we should meet? Discuss? I'm not saying you'd come back on the same terms. Just reconsider the role. Reformat it. You have a unique perspective. There it was. The moment you realize they're persuading you not out of care, but out of fear that the system will fall apart without the quiet ones. I asked, still gently but clearly, the role they see me in or the role I live in? Silence again. Deeper, almost deafening. I continued, because I was the voice, not the decor. I made decisions while others were brainstorming. I was putting out fires while someone else was setting quarterly goals. And you know, Kevin, maybe I would have stayed if someone had ever looked a little closer at who I really was in this company. He started to say something, but I interrupted not harshly, just precisely. You got used to me fixing things without noise, which means you never learned to listen before the silence came. He sighed again. I'm sorry you feel unnoticed. That was not intentional. I smirked. That's exactly why it was dangerous. He suggested I think it over once more. Said many were upset. That team members had already written to him. Why did we let her go? That maybe you're just tired and we can give you a break. I thanked him. Said I'd rested in the last 3 hours more than in the past 3 months at the company. If you want to talk right, he added at the end. Always open. Thank you, I replied, but now I'm only open to what doesn't require going back to where I wasn't seen. We said goodbye. I hung up. Still sat in silence. Music played, sunlight fell on the windowsill, and somewhere in my heart no pain, no anger, no bitterness. Just a steady feeling. I'm no longer a tool. I'm no longer a background process. I'm not a role. I'm a person. And now, finally, I live not as an asset in someone else's charter, but as the main character of my own story. A week had passed since the letter. If someone had told me that one morning's thank you and goodbye would become a catalyst for something bigger, I wouldn't have believed it. I didn't shout. I didn't burn bridges. I just told the truth. Calmly, to the point, and left. And then it began. First, quiet likes on LinkedIn, then comments from people I didn't even know. This letter is like I wrote it myself just 5 years ago. Thank you for putting into words what I couldn't find. Silence can be louder than a slammed door. You proved it. My inbox started living its own life. HR experts, consultants, Delaware I managers, even a former CTO whom I once briefly met at a hackathon wrote, "We seem to have lost the ability to notice those who hold the walls." One comment struck me especially. "You became a mirror for those who always thought they were to blame for being tired." I was sitting in a cafe on Bedford Avenue, staring at those words, and for the first time in a long while, there was no usual whisper of anxiety inside. There was excitement, pure, unclouded. On the third day after publishing, I received a message from an unknown account with a hexagonal icon and a black and white logo. "Jordan, hi, we've been following you. You articulate very precisely what many are afraid even to think. We have an idea. Would you like to have a call?" It turned out to be a team from Greystone Ventures, a small but growing VC fund in Chicago. Their goal to reboot product leadership culture in startups, not through KPIs, but through the architecture of thinking. Their words. I smiled skeptically. Thought? Another group of culture saviors while they recruit founders who fire people over Zoom. But I scheduled the call anyway. Curiosity won over cynicism. There were 3 on the call. Chris, partner at the fund, Ellie, COO, and Nick, a former co-founder of a startup that shut down precisely because it lost its invisible leaders. Chris spoke first. "We saw how your letter spread. This is not just viral text. This is meaning engineering. We want to offer you a role as a consultant for product teams, a mentor, an architect of the internal system. We have 6 startups in the portfolio and all lack the same thing, people who see not just features, but people." I was silent, digesting. Ellie added, "This is not an office, not 50 meetings a week. It's you, on your terms, at your pace. We don't want you to become someone else. We want you to stay yourself, but with a microphone." And right then, sitting in that same cafe with a cup of cold drip coffee and a drop of syrup on my sleeve, I realized, I won't return to the system, but I can become the one who helps others not to fall through it. I don't know what surprised me more, their offer or my own readiness to say yes without doubts, without regrets, without second-guessing, am I good enough? That evening, I walked along the Williamsburg waterfront, sat on a bench, and wrote in my notes, "Don't be afraid to be the first to leave the table." Sometimes, the ones who stay are just too scared to admit they're not fed. I wasn't angry, not vengeful. I just wasn't the one who sits until the last moment, hoping dessert will be served. Greystone signed a contract with me. Consulting. Mentoring. The first session with a product team in Austin. I already knew how I'd start. I'm not here to teach you how to manage tasks. I'm here to teach you to notice people before they leave as quietly as I did. This wasn't a new job. It was a new chapter. Where I finally understood. It's not scary to be the first to get up from the table. What's scary is to sit at it when the plate is empty, and you're still waiting to be appreciated. I wasn't expecting applause. I didn't hope for an epiphany. I left and thought everything would just keep spinning without me, like a clock missing one gear, but they still believe the battery will keep it running. But apparently I underestimated the power of invisible work, the kind no one counts, the kind rarely rewarded with bonuses but without which everything falls apart. At first, there were rumors. A former colleague, Jason, messaged me on LinkedIn. "Did you hear? The ops platform crashed. The client left on the second day after your letter." I read it and simply nodded to myself. Incident with Schadenfreude, but with almost scientific curiosity. Like watching a building whose foundation you painstakingly fixed for years suddenly sink because no one wanted to admit it had cracks. A few days later, others started writing too. At first, former colleagues. "Remember the Atlas project? It got frozen. Did you know Mike was made project lead? He left after a week. Now they're just passing responsibility around. No one understands what and how you did it. Everything you left is chaos." Then the clients. One longtime partner wrote to the company's official email. We've been trying to get in touch with Jordan. She handled our roadmap with surgical precision. The new team seems lost. Another rumor has it, refused to renew their contract once they realized the person who held all the logic together no longer worked there. One of my favorite moments, a screenshot someone sent me, a fragment of an internal email from a manager. Jordan didn't just leave, she took the narrative with her, the clarity, the why. Now we're left with tasks, but no sense of direction. I stared at those words and though strange. For so many years they told me, you're not a leader, you're just executing. And now, when I'm gone, they suddenly realize the entire architecture was in the executor's head. Meanwhile, I was on a call with a new startup. A small AI team from Minneapolis, building a platform to track emotional burnout in distributed teams. Ironic, right? Tim, their founder, said, "We don't want to repeat the mistakes of startups where everything depends on chaos and charisma. We need a system, but not a dead one. A living one. One where people don't drown but surface. We heard you know how to build that." I laughed quietly to myself. When you leave a system that didn't value you but take the meaning with you, it's not fleeing. It's exporting. I said, "Okay, I don't build processes for the sake of processes. I help companies build an environment where people don't get tired of defending themselves every day." The contract was signed that very evening, my first as an independent product strategy advisor. My hourly rate? Twice what my old salary was. My workload? Half as much. My clarity? 100 times greater. They probably thought I'd leave and the system would get lighter. But as one of those former colleagues wrote, when Jordan left, she didn't free up space. She showed how heavy that space really is. Now I don't keep tabs on them. I don't waste time on what's up with the X's. But honestly, when headlines like "Why Startups Lose Culture After Quiet Leaders Leave" pop up in my feed, I can't help but smile. Because I wasn't the one who lost when I stood up and left. They lost when they failed to notice who they were losing. When I was invited to the podcast Work in Progress, I almost declined. I wasn't looking to become a LinkedIn viral hero or an inspiring Fast Company column. But then I thought maybe it's worth sharing. Not for fame, but for those still sitting in their Slack chats, writing other people's presentations and afraid to take a step into the unknown. We recorded the episode in a studio in Austin. The host, Jay Mullins, started with a smile. "Jordan, your resignation letter was read by 2.3 million people, but now I want you to tell us, when did you realize this wasn't the end?" I smirked. 3 hours after I sent it, when the director called me and said, "Jordan, can we talk?" That's when I realized sometimes to be heard, you have to leave loudly, not out of anger, but out of respect. For yourself. We talked for almost an hour. About the culture of passing tasks and quiet heroes. About how companies chase charisma, forgetting that sometimes the most important thing is a calm mind, not a loud voice. About how I was fired more than once morally, systemically before I physically left. And about how now I work with founders who don't want to repeat the same mistake. At one point, Jay asked, "If you could send another letter now, after some time, what would you write?" I thought for a moment and answered, "Nothing, because the real letter isn't the one you send on a Monday morning. The real letter is the path you pave afterwards. It's the choice not to seek revenge, but to build. Not to argue, but to prove with actions. And if you walk that path, you don't need to write the letter anymore. Others write it. In reviews, messages, new opportunities." He nodded and asked the last question. "If you could say one sentence to those afraid to leave?" I looked straight into the camera and said, "I thought quitting was a full stop. It turned out to be an access point." When the recording ended, I walked out of the studio and the Texas sun was already setting. On my phone, a new message from one of my startup clients. "Jordan, can we set up a strategy review? The roadmap you helped us draft is changing everything." I smiled. A few days later, we were already sitting in a new office. A small room on the second floor of an old building in East Chicago. My board's still blank. I'm standing with a marker in front of my small but bold team. The room smells of coffee and freedom. I write the first word, clarity. Then another. Trust. And next to them arrows, blocks, hypotheses. My team is quiet, but I see how they breathe easier. They know, here, you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. Here, it's enough to be clear, to be timely, to be yourself. The camera pulls back. On the wall, the logo of my new company, Northbeam Strategy. And underneath the motto, People build systems. We build with people first. And suddenly I realize, this isn't a letter. This is a new chapter.